All right, how's everybody doing today? Hotep, hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. So it is Sunday, July 18th, 2021. And we're live. Hope everybody's doing well. So I wanted to come on for a few minutes and tell you about a online course that I teach. Some of you have maybe heard me talk about it before and seen me talk about it on my radio show. But I want to talk about a online course that I teach. It's a 10-week online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And we deal with thousands of years of history and deal with what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay. So I want to do a brief overview of this online course. And it takes place on Sundays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We teach it on my online school, so it's not here on Facebook or YouTube. But you can register for the online course. We'll post a link here. You can register for it. And we do the class live, but all the sessions are recorded also. So you can ask questions in the class with the live chat, but all the sessions are recorded as well. So I do a PowerPoint presentation. We're going to flip over to the PowerPoint presentation. We're going to do a brief overview of this online course, and you can register for it and join us in class. All right. So we see history in the news every day. Okay, we see history in the news every day, whether we're talking about Juneteenth, whether we're talking about most recently, I was reading this article dealing with Texas. OK, and we see the attack on history, the attack on critical race theory, the attack on the 1619 Project. But if we look at this article right here from New York Times, and then I'm going to go to the PowerPoint presentation here in just a second. But if we look at this article here from the New York Times, right, this is from May 20th, 2021. Texas pushes to obscure the state's history of slavery and racism. Texas pushes to obscure the state's history of slavery and racism. Texas is awash in bills aimed at fending off critical examinations of the state's past. Okay. Now, the reason why this is so important in this whole fight over the 1619 Project, this whole attack on critical race theory, different states in their state legislatures, they're pushing laws to suppress what can be taught about systemic racism in school and slavery. Whoever controls the teaching of the past will control the trajectory of the future. Whoever controls the teaching of the past will control the trajectory of the future. And this is why the real history has to be taught in schools. This is why you hear me talk about the study from the Southern Poverty Law Center, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery, which documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in schools all across the country. And it lays out numerous techniques and numerous suggestions on how to more correctly teach that history. Okay, so we have this article here from the New York Times. This is from May 2020. Okay, May 20th, 2021, I should say. And when you study the history of Texas, and I just did a show back in June dealing with the Mexican-American War and dealing with Texas becoming part of the Union in 1845, coming into the U.S. as a slaveholding state. But Texas, California, and New York, what is in those textbooks influences what's in the textbooks across the country. These are the 3 states with the largest school districts. The proposal in Texas, a state that influences school curriculums, around the country through its huge textbook market, amount to some of the most aggressive efforts to control the teaching of American history. Okay, keep in mind, whoever controls the teaching of the past will control the trajectory of the future. And they come as nearly a dozen other Republican-led states seek to ban or limit how the role of slavery and pervasive effects of racism can be taught. Okay, so read the rest of this article. They talk about Idaho, Louisiana, New Hampshire, Tennessee, etc. All right. And Louisiana, Tennessee, and Texas. Okay. These are all former slaveholding states and also former Confederate states as well. So then we look at this update to this story here, right? And I'm going to go to the PowerPoint presentation in just a second, but we look at this update to this story. This is from July 16th, 2021. This is from BloombergLaw.com, BloombergLaw.com. Texas Senate votes to remove required lessons on civil rights. Texas State Senate votes to remove required lessons on civil rights. Well, why would we do something like that? People have to sit back. Why would they do something like that? What's so harmful about teaching about civil rights, and what's so harmful about teaching the real history of about the Civil War and slavery and things like this? You also have to study the state constitutions. You also have to study the state constitutions of these various states, like the Texas State Constitution of 1876. And you've heard me talk about the Mississippi State Constitution of 1890, which instituted poll taxes and literacy tests, things like this. Okay, so this shows us the intersection between history and law and politics. These are some of the things I deal with in the online course. This shows you the intersection between history, law, and politics. We look at this article here from the Washington Post. You've heard me talk about the Mississippi plan to keep blacks from voting in 1890. We came here to exclude the Negro. This is what was voted on at the Mississippi State Convention in 1890. And Judge Solomon Saladin Calhoun, who was the judge, who was a white county judge who presided over the convention, he said, the convention's president, Solomon Saladin Calhoun, a white county judge, put the voting issue bluntly. He said, quote, "Let's tell the truth. If it bursts the bottom of the universe." He said, "We came here to exclude the Negro. Nothing short of this will answer." Now, this is 1890. So this is 35 years after the Civil War ends. Okay, so this is 25 years after the Civil War ends, I should say. 25 years after the Civil War ends, 1865. And African Americans are the majority population in the state of Mississippi. Delegates eventually adopted a literacy test and a poll tax geared to suppress the black vote in a state with a black majority. The majority of the population of Mississippi in 1890 was African American. The Mississippi Plan became the model throughout the South, part of a raft of racially oppressive Jim Crow laws that ended Reconstruction. So what we have here, the reason why you need the civil rights movement is because of what happened with the Mississippi State Constitution and the Louisiana State Constitution of 1898, Texas State Constitution of 1876, and them attacking the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment and things like this. This is why you needed a modern day civil rights movement, right? So all this is tied to history, and this is tied to politics. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Okay, politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Okay, now there's one article. This is the article I was looking for here from the Washington Post. Show you how all this is connected. What's taking place in the state legislature, what's taking place at the school board level. Okay, the attack on critical race theory, the attack on the 1619 Project, trying to suppress teaching about systemic racism in schools and the history of slavery. All this is tied to history. The more we understand about our history and the history of this country, the better we can navigate throughout it. The better we will have a better understanding of who needs to be voted out of office, who needs to be put into office, the policies that need to be pushed, the policies and laws that need to be corrected. All this ties into history. if we look at this article here, then we'll go to the PowerPoint presentation in just a second here. And I posted the link to register for this 10-week online course. We teach it on Sundays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay. And we do the class live. All the sessions are recorded. The class is regularly $130. It's on sale $80. As soon as you register, you can start watching the archive content for the class we did last Sunday, and you can join us in class for the next class. A Texas bill drew ire for saying it would preserve purity of the ballot box. Here's the history of the phrase, because purity of the ballot box has a racist history behind it, and that was part of the Texas State Constitution of 1876. That's going to lead to things like the all-white primaries in 1918, and African Americans were excluded from voting. Okay, so read this article here. It was a word choice loaded with history. The Democratic lawmaker said Thursday, a phrase that fueled all-white primaries during the era of Jim Crow laws and justified the disenfranchisement of people deemed unfit to vote. Okay, but read this full article here and research that purity of the ballot box. Okay, that was part of the Texas State Constitution of 1876. Now, if we go and look at what just happened in Texas, okay, we go and look what just happened in Texas. This article here is from July 16th. Republicans are attacking teaching about civil rights and the civil rights movement in schools. Texas Senate votes to remove required lessons on civil rights. This is July 16th, 2021. Now, we know that 51 Democrats from the Texas House of Representatives, they're in Washington, D.C. They have left the state of Texas to deny Republicans a quorum so they can't vote to push through the voter restriction bill in Texas and get that signed into law, which has a history. You got to study the history of Texas. You have to study the history of the Alamo and settlers from the U.S. going into Texas territory, setting up this Alamo fort, having slavery in Texas, even though Vicente Guerrero, the first black president, he was the second president of Mexico, the first black president of Mexico. He was the first black president in North America. He became president in 1829 of Mexico. He was a former slave and he abolished slavery. And in the Alamo fort, the settlers from the U.S. had slaves, and it's going to cause this conflict, this territorial dispute. And you have the Battle of the Alamo. That's where Davy Crockett's going to be killed, and Jim Bowie, who created the Bowie knife, they're going to be killed. All this stuff. There's going to be revenge from the U.S. and Sam Houston leading his charge against Santa Anna, against Santa Anna's army. All of this, but Texas is going to become a state in the Union, and Texas wins its independence from Mexico in 1836. It becomes a state in the Union in 1845. Then 1846 to 1848, then you have the Mexican-American War, which is also the U.S. is fighting for land. And the U.S. ends up getting Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, California, Utah, and Nevada. All that land was Mexican territory. All that land was Mexican territory. And this deals with manifest destiny and deals with Europeans in the U.S. They're trying to take over the entire North American continent. Mexico loses a third of their land after the Mexican-American War because of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The U.S. buys that land for $15 million. Mexico didn't want to sell the land. They lose a third of their territory. Okay, behind all this territorial dispute and Europeans trying to take over the entire North American continent. So if we look at this here and understanding whoever controls the teaching of the past will control the trajectory of the future, Texas Senate votes to remove required lessons on civil rights. Okay, the Texas State Senate on Friday, Friday, July 16th, passed legislation that would end requirements that public schools include writings on women's suffrage and the civil rights movement in social studies classes. Among the figures whose works would be dropped Susan B. Anthony. Now, we know she was a white supremacist as well. Now, Susan B. Anthony did make amends with Frederick Douglass before he died. Frederick Douglass died in 1895, 5 years after the Mississippi State Constitution of 1890 was signed into law. She did make amends with him, but we know there was racism in the women's suffrage movement, but we should still study the women's suffrage movement as well. The movement of white women to vote, and there were African-American women involved in that, like Sojourner Truth as well. We still need to study that history. Okay. So they're talking about with this bill that passed the Texas State Senate. Among the figures whose works would be dropped, Susan B. Anthony, Cesar Chavez, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose I Have a Dream speech and the letter from a Birmingham jail would no longer make the curriculum cut. And the way even they teach the I Have a Dream speech is not really historically accurate unless they tell you that the original name of the speech was not I Have a Dream. It was originally called Normalcy Never Again. Then it was called A Cancelled Check. And the speech was not about a dream, because when you read Clarence B. Jones, the article that Clarence B. Jones wrote for the Washington Post, and he was a speechwriter, he was one of the speechwriters for Dr. King. He talks about how the phrase I have a dream did not appear in any of the original drafts of the speech. And the speech was not about a dream. You go to Library of Congress website, loc.gov, and read it. You go to the King Institute at Stanford University. You look at, they have all his papers online at Stanford University that you can read, the King Institute. Okay. When you read the speech, he's talking about dismantling white supremacy. He's talking about dismantling white supremacy. He calls out police brutality. He calls out discrimination and racism. He talks about Negroes moving from a smaller ghetto to a larger ghetto. He's talking about black people in the South who can't vote, and African Americans in New York who feel they have nothing to vote for. He's calling out America on its hypocrisy. And he says we were given a promissory note 100 years prior with the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. And he said when we take that promissory note to the bank and try to cash it, is marked insufficient funds. He's calling America out on its hypocrisy. Mahalia Jackson, who was there at the march and sang 2 songs, Mahalia Jackson yells out, "Tell them about the dream, Martin, tell them about the dream." So then he shifts after he deals with the meat of the speech, and then it starts talking about the dream and the beloved community. But the beloved community is what happens after you dismantle white supremacy and racism. People focus on the end of the speech, but don't focus on the substance of the speech and what it was about. The speech wasn't about a dream. It's about dismantling white supremacy and racism and holding America accountable from a promissory note given to us 100 years prior. So if we're going to teach about the speech, we need to teach correctly about the speech, and we need to read the entire speech. People skip over him talking about police brutality in the speech. You can go to loc.gov, Library of Congress website, and read the speech. They have the full speech there. Now, the bill SB 3, which passed on a vote of 18-4 in the Texas State Senate, is now stalled because the Texas House of Representatives cannot achieve a quorum while a breakaway group of Democrats is out of the state. Okay, because they're fighting for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the For the People Act. Okay. The Texas Democrats who left and went to Washington, D.C. to draw more attention to this issue and try to get support from dumbass senators like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. Now, the special session is set to end on August 6, 2021. Now, this bill will remove more than 24 teaching requirements from a new law, HB 3979, that bars the teaching of critical race theory. But critical race theory is not being taught in K through 12 schools. They don't teach critical race theory. That is a legal analysis taught in law schools and graduate schools in college. They don't teach critical race theory in K through 12. This is a problem looking for a solution. That bars the teaching of critical race theory, an academic framework exploring racism shaping another country. And just teaching history is not critical race theory. Just teaching history and history of slavery and systemic racism, that's not critical race theory. That is a legal analysis taught in law schools. The law included a list of historic figures, events, and documents required for inclusion in social studies classes, the Senate passed bill will remove most mentions of people of color and women from those requirements. I wonder why they would do this. Now, at the same time, Texas is becoming less white as a state and more a state that has more a growing population of African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, etc. Texas is becoming less white. Whoever controls the teaching of the past will control the trajectory of the future. The Senate passed bill will remove most mentions of people of color and women from those requirements, along with the requirement that students be taught about the history of white supremacy and, quote, the ways in which it is morally wrong. They want to remove that requirement as well, along with the requirement that students be taught about the history of white supremacy. Now, why would you remove Dr. King and I Have a Dream speech and a letter from a Birmingham jail, and you also want to remove requirements that students be taught about the history of white supremacy and the ways in which it is morally wrong? The measure would also bar the teaching of the 1619 Project, a New York Times initiative exploring U.S. history, starting at the date enslaved people arrived in the English colonies. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, Republican, who presides over the Senate, over the Texas State Senate, said in a statement about the vote that, quote, Senate Bill 3 will make certain that critical race philosophies, including the debunked 1619 founding myth, are removed from our school curriculums statewide, end quote. Yes, he's an old white man. Read this article. This is from July 16, 2021. This ain't from 1871. This is from 2021. Texas Senate votes to remove required lessons on civil rights. I guess they don't teach about Malcolm X either, right? I guess it's safe to say, if you don't want to teach about Dr. King, I guess it's safe to assume that you don't teach about Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, Kwame Ture. So let's look at this overview of this online course that I teach. We deal with thousands of years of history, what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place, understand why this history is so important. The history and politics intersect. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, upon resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. We understand that what you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you've been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So this class is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. It started out as a lecture that I did January 24th, 2015, a 4.5-hour lecture. It's about 7 years of research. It's evolved to a 10-week online course that I teach. And I do radio 6 days a week here in Detroit, Monday through Fridays, 11 p.m. to midnight. Eastern Standard Time, Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on 9:10 a.m. Superstation WFDF. So, and whenever I speak, I know I may say some things that are outside the circumference of some people's awareness. So I usually say something like this: the space inside this circle represents my realm of knowledge. Everything I think I know about whatever I think I know is represented within the circumference of this circle. I must keep in mind that there's still things that exist outside the circumference of my own awareness. So I learned this from one of my teachers, Dr. Ray Hagins. The African Village. We look at some other articles very quickly here, recent articles. This is from February 2021, Mock Slave Auctions, Racist Lessons, How U.S. History Class Often Traumatizes, Dehumanizes Black Students. Then we look at this one here, February, let's see, that was March 4th, 2021. This is February 10th, 2021, USA Today. Other one was USA Today as well. Republican state lawmakers want to punish schools that teach the 1619 Project. Okay, Nicole Hannah-Jones, even though there are some problems with the 1619 Project, it's flawed, there's still some good things that can be taught. I think it could be corrected. The whole thing shouldn't be attacked. We talk about Juneteenth. You've seen some of my presentations on Juneteenth. 60% of Americans know little or nothing about Juneteenth. And what African Americans know about Juneteenth, a lot of that is false also. That deals with understanding history. This is from the New York Times. Most Americans know little or nothing about Juneteenth poll finds. Okay. This is Teaching Hard History of American Slavery from the Southern Poverty Law Center. This is one of my teachers, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, who teaches us whoever controls the images controls your self-esteem, self-respect, and self-development. Whoever controls the history controls the future. Let's look at this here. Okay. So let's look quickly here at a brief overview of some of the things we deal with in the online course. So we deal with understanding what the transatlantic slave trade was, events that take place. We deal with ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet, Africa, Nile Valley region of Africa, Nubia, Ta-Nehisi, Ethiopia, all of that. Okay. What were some of the events that led up to the transatlantic slave trade starting? What role did Christopher Columbus play in the transatlantic slave trade? When did Africans first come to the U.S. as slaves? Did Africans sell themselves into slavery? We deal with that complicated history. When were African people in America before the transatlantic slave trade? That's extremely important. We deal with Christopher Columbus. We deal with Christopher Columbus, who on his 4 voyages, we see him going into Cuba and Haiti and Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Honduras, Panama, all those areas. And we see Haiti and Cuba, as well as Jamaica. Okay. We see them in the news right now. The assassination of President Jovenel Moise. You see me talk about that. We see the protests in Cuba taking place now. And also Jamaica is preparing a petition to petition Britain for about $10 billion in reparations. Okay, because we know that Jamaica was a colony. Jamaica was colonized by the British. And when we look at where Columbus went on his 4 voyages, this is why Columbus is so important to understanding the spread of the transatlantic slave trade. Now, he did not create the transatlantic slave trade. We see it going back to 1441 with the Portuguese. But we have to understand thousands of years of history that lead up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place, the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. And then we see with Columbus helps to lay the foundation for the expansion of the transatlantic slave trade and the exploitation of indigenous people and the expansion of, and he helps to lay the foundation for racism and capitalism, things like this. He helps that expand. But August 3rd, 1492, he set sail on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Now, 1492 is the same year that the Moors lose control of the last stronghold in Spain, which was Granada, January 2nd, 1492. And this is part of the Reconquista, which is the reconquest, taking back the territories that the Moors occupied. The Reconquista starts in 722 AD. And we see these tensions, these conflicts between the African Moors and these Europeans, especially in Spain and Portugal, things like this. Columbus goes into the Bahamas, which he calls San Salvador. He goes into Cuba and then Hispaniola. This is 1492. And the western portion of the island of Hispaniola, the British are going to take the French are going to take control of that. And it's going to be called Saint Dominique. And then this is where the Haitian Revolution is going to take place, 1791 to 1804. Okay, so that's the western portion of this island of Hispaniola where Haiti is. Okay, so you see this 1492, then 1493, 1494, Columbus goes into the West Indies. He goes into Bariquin, which is Puerto Rico, and Jamaica, 1494. The Spanish conquer these areas. Cuba, Jamaica, and Haiti were originally conquered by Columbus and the Spanish. And what's taking place now, we are still feeling the effects of what happened over 500 years ago with Columbus and his 4 voyages. And he was doing this on behalf of the Spanish crown, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Is going to be their grandson, Emperor Charles V, in 1518, who's going to sign the Asiento de Negros, which is the license coming from Spain, giving that to European nations to provide the Spanish colonies with slaves. And this is African slaves. And this is going to really help the transatlantic slave trade to expand and increases the demand for African slaves. Third voyage, May 1498, Trinidad and Venezuelan mainland in South America. Fourth voyage, May 1504, Panama and Honduras in Central America. Now, Columbus never came to the land we call the United States of America. I know they have statues and busts and things like this of Columbus. He never came to this land. Closest he came here is Cuba, which is 90 miles away. And one of the things they're setting up on these in these colonies, in these Caribbean colonies, are plantations, sugarcane plantations. Okay, which is a huge industry, sugarcane plantations. Okay, so these are just a few of the things that we deal with in the online course. Also, we deal with, and this is on Sundays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We do the class live. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch it over and over again. You can use this also with your children. I would say it's PG-13. I don't do a lot of cursing, and it's not vulgar. And because we deal with slavery, things like this, we have to deal with some unpleasant topics, of course, but I would say it's PG-13. And we do the class live. All the sessions are recorded. So as soon as you register, you can watch last Sunday's class. And then also the Saturday course that I'm teaching, that's wrapping up. So you get classes 1 through 10 archived of the Saturday course that you can watch as well of the same class. Some other things we deal with in the course. We deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. 2 of the books that I use in the class. So we have a PowerPoint presentation. We have about 50 articles that we reference. There's a timeline of history going back 5 million years that I use, but I also reference books. Now, you don't have to feel obligated to buy any of these books. Okay. You don't have to buy any of these books. You can if you want to. This is one of them, Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. And I'm looking for my this other one here by my friend Ronoko Rashidi, Black Star, the African Presence in Early Europe. Okay, so these are 2 of the books that I use in the class. It's about 10 that I use. This is another one. This is a symbols encyclopedia, a symbols dictionary, symbols, signs and symbols, an illustrated guide to their origins and meanings. Africa's on the front. You see the metal netter. Africa's on the back. You see the caduceus, which comes out of ancient Kemet, the universal symbol of medicine. You see the Ankh on the back as well. Okay. The African symbol for eternal life. This is another book that I use. This is volume 1, African American Chronology, 1492 to 1972. This is volume 1. And this is also one that I use in a second course that I teach, a new 10-week course that's about to start up. That's going to start up. The new one that there's going to be a second 10-week course that I'm going to do that picks up where ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa leaves off. This new course that's going to start up Saturday, July 24th. It's going to start up. The new one is going to deal with history from 1865 through 1965 up until about 1968, and the assassination of Dr. King and the Black Power movement, 1966. We're going to go through and analyze a 10-year period of time of history each class. Okay, so that one, that new one, that is going to pick up with this course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, where this course leaves off. That new one is going to, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power. Okay, so that one is going to start up July 24th. All right, Saturday, July 24th. So That's something to look forward to as well. So if you're already in this class, this 10-week class, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, or you've taken it before, this new class is going to blow you away, because now we'll be able to zero in each class and spend about 2 hours analyzing approximately a 10-year period of time of history, going from the end of slavery, 40 acres and a mule, special field order number 15, Juneteenth, 13th Amendment, 1865 through Reconstruction, Jim Crow era, Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, Grandfather Clause, 1898, World War I, 1914 to 1918, Great Migration, 1915 to 1970, Red Summer, 1919, over 25 major race riots in the country, Tulsa Race Massacre, 1921, Rosewood, 1923. We'll be able to study all that history. Emmett Till, August 28th, 1955. Montgomery bus boycott, December 5th, 1955. Tuskegee, Alabama economic boycott that lasted 4 years, four times as long as the Montgomery bus boycott, 1957 to 1961. SNCC being founded May 1960. SCLC, 1957. Dr. King's house being firebombed twice in 1956 during the Montgomery bus boycott. Civil rights movement, Black Power movement. We'll be able to analyze a 10-year period of time, each class. That's going to be a fantastic class also. All right. So in this one here, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understand the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school, which is a precursor to from the Civil War to civil rights and Black Power. It's a precursor to this class, to the new class. Some of the other things we deal with here are shocking archaeological discoveries that are causing experts to rethink everything. When these, we deal with a number of different archaeological discoveries. We talked about this last week, like out of Mesopotamia, out of Morocco, June of 2017. They found remains of Homo sapiens dating back 300,000, 350,000 years ago. And the oldest fossils or remains of Homo sapiens they had before that were found in Ethiopia that date back about 195,000 years ago. And the archaeologists are saying this is causing us to have to rethink everything. They have to push the timelines back. They realize all this stuff is older than what we thought. There's new technology. There's these new archaeological discoveries coming out every other week. Okay. We deal with insurance companies that took out policies on slave ships and enslaved Africans on the plantations, like the Nautilus Life Insurance Company, founded in spring of 1845 in Manhattan. And then they're going to change their name to the New York Life Insurance Company. In their first 3 years, they take out about 500 insurance policies on enslaved Africans on plantations. And there were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. And these skills, trades, and crafts are going to be used to build this country. Okay. We did more than just cook the food, and wash clothes and pick cotton. Okay. There's this book that came out in 1978 by, James Newton and, Ronald Lewis, called The Other Slaves, Mechanics, Artisans, and Craftsmen. The Other Slaves, Mechanics, Artisans, and Craftsmen. And this deals with they list 262 skills, trades, and crafts that we had in this country. Many of these skills we're bringing with us from Africa. We were anchor makers and artists and bakers and barrel makers and bartenders and basket makers and beer makers and blacksmiths and bricklayers and brick makers and cabinet makers, cigar makers, cooks, coppersmiths, decorative furnishers, fishermen, engineers, gardeners, hemp baggers, herb doctors, horse trainers, hunters, locksmiths. We were also jockeys, though also. So when we studied the Kentucky Derby, first ran 1875, 13 of the 15 jockeys, some sources say 14 of the 15 jockeys were African-American men. Many of them former slaves. The winner of the first Kentucky Derby was an African-American man named Oliver Lewis. He was 19 years old. We dominated horse racing. We dominated horse racing, and there was a concerted effort by white men to push us out of horse racing because they got jealous of the type of money we were making. As long as we were making money for them when we were slaves, it was all right. When slavery ends and now we can make money for ourselves, even though we have white sponsors and things like this, but now we're more in control. We can make money for ourselves. Now it's a problem. So the last African-American winner of the Kentucky Derby was Jimmy Wink Winkfield in 1902. So we deal with these types of topics. We deal with ancient Africa, African civilizations, Ghana, Songhai, Mali. We deal with Freemasonry, America, and the founding fathers, because the Moors are taking the teachings from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt into Europe. And these teachings are going to bring Europe out of the Dark Ages, unfortunately, to our detriment. We see the Moors go in 711 AD. They're taking things like chemistry, or what they called alchemy. They're taking the periodic tables. They're introducing new foods, musical instruments, introducing new ways to make swords and make weapons, all different types of things like this. They're introducing treaties to, they're introducing writings on how to make surgical instruments. Okay. And they're teaching freely those who want to learn. These types of teachings are going to, the Moors and the Arabs are going to build the University of Salamanca in Spain around 1285, 1286 AD. Okay. Really the first university there in Spain. Other universities of Toledo and Bologna and Naples, Oxford University, they're going to study the teachings that the Moors are introducing into Europe. Everything we taught them came back to kick us in the behind. And we see this is going to lead to the transatlantic slave trade. This is why I say when we look at this stuff chronologically, because see, the way that it's taught in school, I mean, when I was in Wayne State University and Africana studies classes, the way they teach it, they start oftentimes in 15th century, mid 15th century. And they make it seem like when the Portuguese go into Mauritania and we see the Spanish get involved in the transatlantic slave trade right after the Portuguese, they make it seem like this is the first contact these Europeans have had with African people outside of Greece and Rome and Alexander the Greek going into Egypt, invading Egypt and things like this. Outside of that, they make it seem like this is the first time. No, the Moors were all throughout Europe. They're all throughout Europe. They're in Austria and Czechoslovakia and Germany, things like this. They're all throughout Europe, intermixing with the European culture. Also, not just changing European culture, but changing the complexion of Europeans, because African Moors are intermixing into the European culture as well, changing their complexion, especially in Spain and Portugal. So when we really look at this chronology of history, the transatlantic slave trade is really Europeans getting revenge on Africans for what was happening in Europe and these conflicts between these Moors and Europeans. It's not just something that just fell out of the sky. There's a pretext for this. They were already dealing with these Africans. They knew who they were. It wasn't just something that there was conflict. Now, I don't think anybody knew that it was going to explode, over the course of time to what it eventually evolved to. But there was conflict between them. It wasn't like just something that's just, oh, we don't know what happened. We don't know how we don't know how these laws just manifested. No, there's a pretext to this. Okay. Let's continue. So we deal with the origins of the term America, Africa, and Moor, Freemasonry, America, and the founding fathers. The problem with slave movies, why we're being bombarded with slave movies and slave themed TV shows, even though slavery is part of our history, when they deal with a lot of these movies, they don't put this in the proper historical context either, and don't deal with the African presence in this country going back tens of thousands of years. And there's a lack of TV shows dealing with other aspects of our history and movies, especially dealing with ancient Africa. If you can make Black Panther, Black Panther was a fantastic movie. I mean, I've done a 3-hour lecture dealing with the film Black Panther. Black Panther incorporates African history and culture and 11 different African cultures, spiritual systems. Bast, the Panther deity, that comes from Bastet in ancient Kemet. Bastet was a netter, one of the deities. So it's a powerful movie. But if you can create Black Panther, you can create movies about the Ghana, Songhai, and Mali, and Mansa Musa, and Amenhotep III, and Queen T, and you can do movies about ancient Nubia, ancient Africa, ancient Kemet, all that stuff. If you can do Black Panther, you can do those other movies. We talk about Asar, Arset, and Heru and the origins of the Immaculate Conception story. That goes back thousands of years in ancient Africa. And when we study Europeans in Europe, they were worshiping the Black Madonna and Child before they decolorized the Virgin Mary. They were worshiping the Black Madonna and Child, which comes from Asar, Arset, and Heru. Before they decolorized her, because see, what we're going to see is, and we deal with this in the class, this is why we take you throughout history, right? What we see is as Europeans are coming out of the Dark Ages, conquering people's lands, extracting wealth to rebuild Europe, because Europe, as Dr. John Henry Clark correctly teaches us, was land poor, people poor, and resource poor. Europe had lost 1/4 to 1/3 of their population due to the Black Death, the bubonic plague that hits in 1347 AD and hits in 1347 to 1400. Europe loses somewhere between 25 million to 75 million people. Okay. And they're rebuilding. They're trying to rebuild Europe. They're trying to expel the Moors as well. And as they're conquering people's land, they start to rebuild and gain more power. Okay. As this is taking place, they are expelling the Moors. Some of the Moors are being enslaved, things like this. The Europeans are setting up these colonies in Cuba and in Jamaica and Hispaniola, etc. You start having a rise in the European phenotype, a rise in the dominance of the European phenotype. So figures, images that were traditionally depicted as African get reinterpreted as European. One of them was the Black Madonna and Child. Okay. Because Europeans, you go back hundreds of years, Europeans, or even before then, Europeans were practically worshiping African people. But we're going to see all this change we see it really change in the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries. We see all this stuff get twisted around. If we look at, let's see here. Let me go back to the part because we have Asar and Arset in here. And I'll show you some images. We do with links to ancient Kemet, Egypt. Kemet being one of the original names for Egypt, Kemet meaning the land of the blacks. Links to ancient Kemet and early Christianity. All right. And the story of the virgin birth and the Immaculate Conception and the adoration. That's an ancient African story before Christianity is created. But then we deal with Christ meaning anointed or anointed one, coming from Christos, which is Greek, Christos, coming from the Kemetic ka rest, which means the rising of the spirit, K-A-R-S-T, ka meaning spirit, rest meaning to rise. These are African concepts that get Europeanized. These are African concepts that get Europeanized. This is why to understand what is, you have to understand what was. So let me pull this up here. We deal with Freemasonry in America, the fake Willie Lynch letter 1712, because Willie Lynch never historically existed. And the Willie Lynch letter is proven to be a fraud. I've interviewed Professor Manu Mpim from Contra Costa College. We dealt with that in depth. The African influence in the film Black Panther, which is a fantastic movie. And for the research on Black Panther and the lectures I've done on Black Panther, one, I read about 100 articles dealing with the film Black Panther and the Black Panther comic book. Two, I spent about 3 months doing research on the film Black Panther. This is this is one book I read dealing with the history of the Black Panther comic book. This book deals with the 52-year history of the Black Panther comic book, because I had to study that and understand how Black Panther fits into the Marvel comic universe and understand these characters and storylines and things like this, because we see a lot of that reflected in the movie. So this is from Marvel, Black Panther, the Ultimate Guide. I had to read this book. And this is a fantastic book here dealing with the Black Panther comic book and all these characters and storylines and all that stuff that we see. I mean, in the film where Killmonger, who comes from the comic book, now they changed the storyline dealing with Killmonger, because in the comic book, Killmonger is 100% Wakandan. In the movie, he is half Wakandan, half African American. They changed that storyline most likely to resonate more with an African American audience. And we see the movie opens in Oakland, California, and ends in Oakland, California, which is a reference to the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, founded in October 1966 in Oakland, California. Okay, so when Killmonger throws T'Challa off of the waterfall, that waterfall is called Warrior Falls. Warrior Falls is where the ritual combat takes place to see who's going to sit on the throne of Wakanda. All right. And, you know, that comes straight out of the comic books. That's from Jungle Action comic books. I think that was 1973. That's Jungle Action comic books. But that scene is straight out the comic books. You know, so there were 11 different African cultures that we see referenced in the movie. Everything coming from Namibia and Nigeria and Ethiopia, etc. So it's a deep film it's a deep movie on multiple levels. So we talk about the film Black Panther as well. And then the language that's spoken in the film Black Panther is isiXhosa. isiXhosa is a Bantu language, just like Kiswahili is a Bantu language. And then the word Wakanda, we know the word Wakanda is a Native American term. We see that in the Omaha, Ponca, and Sioux Indian languages. Wakanda, which means possesses secret powers. Wakanda is a real word, but is also a Bantu word as well. Wakanda also. And let me see here. Which one was that? Oh, yeah. September 1973, Jungle Action comic book number 6, right. Where he gets thrown off, where Killmonger throws T'Challa off the waterfall at Warrior Falls. Okay. That was in 1973 Jungle Action comic books, issue number 6, September 1973. So, and then this other book here I had to read to understand the movie and be able to talk intelligently about the movie and do lectures. Some people didn't do this preparation. Was this book here from Marvel, Black Panther, the official movie special. Black Panther, the official movie special. And this has interviews with the cast and director Ryan Coogler and things like this, gives background information on the film. So it was deep research I had to do to be able to talk about the film and do lectures. Once again, some people were putting information I didn't do no research, but okay. So this class, once again, I teach this on Sundays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. If you go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, it's on the homepage of the website. We posted a link here, but it's also on the homepage of the website. And you scroll down the homepage. We have the information there. Click on register here. Click on register here. And we see the flyer. It takes you to the next page. And click on enroll. As soon as you enroll, you can start watching the content. All right. Class is regularly $130. It's on sale $80. It's on sale $80. I do the class live. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch it over and over again. You still have access to the class even after the class is over with. So next year, you can go back and watch the entire course offering. It's archived. You will also get as a bonus, you'll get the lecture that I did June 16th, dealing with the real history of Juneteenth. It's a 2.5-hour lecture. You get that in digital download format. You get that as a bonus for registering for this 10-week online course. Some of the other things I deal with in the class, when we deal with the transatlantic slave trade, we know that we're dealing with the forced journey of African people from Europe to Africa to the Americas. Trinkets from Europe exchanged for Africans or used or they use money to purchase them. It lasts from roughly 1440s to 1865. And let me see something here. I wanted to show you, so we talk about the Middle Passage and what it was. I wanted to, we deal with Dr. David Imhotep's work. So we also had guest speakers in the class. Dr. David Imhotep was one of my guest speakers. My Saturday class, he spoke to the Saturday class, June 12th. When you register for this online course, you would get archived content, and you get the interview that I did with, you'll get the session where Dr. David Imhotep spoke to our class also. He wrote the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. And this book came out in 2011. His book deals with the African presence in the Americas dating back at least 51,700 years ago. On page 14 of his book, he deals with a discovery made in 2004 in Allendale County, South Carolina, by Dr. Albert Goodyear. Dr. Albert Goodyear is an archaeologist at the University of South Carolina. At this campsite in Allendale County, South Carolina, they found 13 different types of evidence, thoroughly documenting an African presence in this country going back at least 51,700 years ago. Now, since then, actually in the class where Dr. David Imhotep spoke, he talked about a discovery made in the last couple of years in Mexico that shows an African presence going back at least 250,000 years ago. Okay. So he when he spoke to my class, he talked about that discovery. But this one here is in South Carolina, dates back at least 51,700 years ago. Here's what they found. They found artifacts, architecture, campsites, carvings, Egyptian writings, footprints in lava, genetic M174D haploid groups dealing with DNA and genetics, linguistics, paintings, skulls, skeletons, structures, and tools. They found 13 different types of evidence, thoroughly documenting an African presence dating back at least 51,700 years ago. Now, this is before Native Americans came into existence. Okay, this is before Native Americans came into existence. This is why the first Americans were Africans. And even if you look at the 1828 Noah Webster Dictionary and you look up the word American, they tell you that American applied to was the term used by Europeans to describe the Aboriginal and copper-colored races of the Americas. Okay, so what this means is that the term American originally did not apply to Europeans. It applied to African people and Native Americans, because this is who Europeans found when they got here. All right, so even when we use the term American, and American has to do with citizenship, even when we have to use that term, we deal with the origins of that term. We have to understand, well, who were the original Americans? Okay, this causes us to ask questions and do more research and say, well, wait a second, who were the original Americans? And if we look at in the 1828 Noah Webster Dictionary is online, you can research that, but any dictionary, just look up the word American and the etymology of it. And it will usually tell you something to the effect that it was referring to who was here before Europeans got here. But the word American, a native of America, originally, this is from the 1828 Noah Webster Dictionary, originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races found here by the Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of Europeans born in America. So it's telling you that the American did not originally apply to Europeans. This is once again why the first Americans were African people. We are the original Americans. I'm not trying to take anything away from Native Americans. We know they were here before Europeans. But the people who we call Native Americans are the offspring of an intermixing of Africans who were here for tens of thousands of years, and Asians who come here around 3000 BC. And they're going to intermix, in their offspring are who oftentimes are called Native Americans. But it's also important to understand that you have groups of African people who are here who are going to be relabeled as Native Americans also by European settlers, by European colonizers, whatever term you may want to use. You're going to have groups of African people who are here who get relabeled as Native American. And then we look here at this article from ScienceDaily.com. ScienceDaily.com is a scientific website. They have scientific discoveries there, things like that. They have an article from 2004 about Dr. Albert Goodyear and his discovery. Okay. And this is a summary of the discovery. Now, the name of the article is New Evidence Puts Man in North America 50,000 years ago. New Evidence Puts Man in North America 50,000 years ago. Here's a synopsis or a summary of the article. It says radiocarbon tests of carbonized plant remains where artifacts were unearthed last May along the Savannah River in Allendale County by University of South Carolina archaeologist Dr. Albert Goodyear indicate that the sediments containing these artifacts are at least 50,000 years old, meaning that humans inhabited North America long before the last ice age. Well, who were these humans? 50,000 years ago, that's before Native Americans come into existence. And that's before the oldest settlement in North America, which is the Clovis culture settlement found in New Mexico, that they say dates back to about 13,000 years ago. This discovery here blows the Clovis culture settlement out of the water. So who were these people? These were the Khoisan, who come from Southern Africa, go all around the world, have the oldest DNA on the planet, that are ancestors to the Ainu and the Twa, and they were here in this land. This is who this was. New York Times had a good article from February 2010 on Crete, new evidence of very ancient mariners. They talk about stone tools found on the Greek island of Crete over the course of 2 summers. These stone tools date back 130,000 years ago, but Crete has been an island for more than 5 million years. Okay. These discoveries are blowing everything out the water and causing the archaeologists and the paleontologists and the scientists to have to rethink everything. Now, lastly, there was a, where is that? On the show. Yeah, set. Okay, we'll go here. Slide 55, because I have over 100 slides here. We'll go to slide 55. And we see, even when you have the founding fathers, many of them are Freemasons here in this country. And we see the Moors taking the teachings from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt into Europe. And it's going to come back to this land, a lot of those teachings watered down in the form of Freemasonry. But when we look at this right here, the Washington Monument, that's a Tekken, comes straight out of ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, symbol of resurrection from the story of Asar set in Heru. There are about 1,200 Tekkenu throughout ancient Kemet. Today, there are only about somewhere around 12. And when we look at Freemasonry, we see the word Mason is derived from the Latin words mass and sun. Mason means child of light and expresses the desire to pursue light, which is a metaphor for the sun, which symbolizes knowledge. The term child of light or sons and daughters of light was first used to identify first used to identify students who had completed 42 years of study in the temples of ancient Kemet, of ancient Egypt. Okay. And we're going to see these teachings end up in Europe. Okay. We're going to see a lot of these teachings end up in Europe to our detriment. This is all this stuff is going to come back to kick us in the behind once again, as I said. Okay. This is why I said I wish we had never taught them, because and when we study what happened in Europe, we're going to see how all this comes back to kick us in the behind. But we're going to see this information end up in Freemasonry. Okay. It's going to be watered down, but yeah, we're going to see it end up in Freemasonry. And we're going to see it come to this land. Okay. And we see it in symbols also. We see it in symbols like the Tekken, the Washington Monument. And we know that George Washington was a Freemason. Okay. As well. So all right, let's continue here. All right, so the term child of light or sons and daughters of light was first used to identify students who had completed 42 years of study in the temples of ancient Kemet. Many Masonic temples were modified after the temples of Kemet, places where light or knowledge was imparted in a series of steps or degrees. Okay, and historically, light is associated with knowledge. And when we talk about Europe being in the Dark Ages, it was in the era, and it was in a period of time of ignorance. It was in a period of time of ignorance, and the Moors are taking the light from ancient Africa, knowledge, into Europe, bringing Europe out of the Dark Ages. And the next age, going into the 1500s, the next age in Europe is called the Renaissance area, the Renaissance period. And it's a period of enlightenment. Enlightenment. Once again, now light being associated with knowledge. They're coming out of the Dark Ages into the Renaissance age, a period of enlightenment. If you read Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder, which is another book we use in the class, pages 18 to 32, Browder breaks all this down. Browder's a friend of mine as well. I've interviewed him a number of times. He has some really good information. Now Valley Contributions to Civilization is another book that I use from Browder. 50 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence and 13 of the 39 signers of the U.S. Constitution were Freemasons. 4 of the first 5 presidents were Freemasons, and 14 presidents in all have been Freemasons. Now, this is one of the famous statues of Asar, Aset, and Heru, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, and Horus, the first Holy Trinity. And Heru was born on December 25th. Okay. And this is how we get Isis, Aset. Aset means she of throne, but the Greeks called her Isis, and this is how we get the Secrets of Isis TV show from DC Comics in the 1970s. Used to come on Saturday morning, the Shazam and Isis hour. I used to watch it. And I think a few years ago, they had episodes of the Secrets of Isis on Hulu. And when you watch it, they tell you in the trailer of it, when it comes on, they tell you that she gets her powers from ancient Egypt. They don't show any African people, but they tell you she gets her powers from ancient Egypt. And they talk about Hathor, and they start naming these deities, these Neteru, things like this. So we just saw this white woman flying through the air, and her name is Isis. And they say, okay, she gets her powers from Egypt, but they ain't talk about African people. They just co-opted it. It's just cultural appropriation. Some people is lying also, but it's cultural appropriation. Okay, this is what they're doing. And then as we go from Aset and Heru to the Black Madonna and Child that was worshipped all throughout Europe, and they still have statues of the Black Madonna and Child today in Russia and in Poland and in places like this, France. They're worshiping African people. They're worshiping the African woman. And then as you have a rise in the European phenotype, you have a rise in European powers. They start to to colonize this imagery, and then we get the white Mary and Jesus. They start to colonize the imagery and decolorize it. Okay. All right. So these are some of the things we deal with in the online course: Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. If you visit, so we posted a link here, you can register for it. It's a 10-week online course. We deal with thousands of years of history. We do the class live. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch them over and over again. They're archived. You can ask questions in class. Also, we have a live text chat. You can see me. I can't see you. You can be in there in your pajamas, whatever. You can have a bonnet on. So, I mean, you don't have to worry about it. It's not like Zoom where you can see everybody and you see the whole class. You know, it's not like that. You can see me. We have a live text chat. You can ask questions, and or you can email me your questions also. But if you go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, you scroll down, you'll see the information for our online course. Click on register here. It takes you to the next page, and click on enroll. As soon as you register, you can start watching the course content. All right. Okay. We'll post a link here also. And if you have any questions, you can email me as well. ahnshow@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. ahnshow@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And then you'll also get the bonus of the digital download of the 2.5-hour lecture I did dealing with the real history of Juneteenth, also with this class as well. All right. So hopefully you like this type of information. Be sure to follow us here on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Turn on live notifications so when we go, so you know when we go live. If you like this video, click on the thumbs up as well. Click on the like, click on the thumbs up, give us a heart, and we'll see you in class. Remember, right now is correct. Wrong behavior is not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you next time. Peace.